I remember the way they looked at me back then, not with respect, not even with curiosity. They looked at me like I was a mistake that somehow found her way into their war, a girl in the wrong place at the wrong time. To them, I was a soldier in uniform, but not a warrior worth trusting. They called me the lost girl of the battlefield, and I carried that name like a stone in my chest. What they never understood was that stones can break you or they can sharpen you. For me, it was both. I learned early on to stay quiet, to listen more than I spoke. In the silence of the night, I studied the wind like it was a living thing. I measured the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I learned to slow my breath until the world seemed to pause with me. Those details never show up in a service record. They do not earn medals, but they are the only reason I am here to tell you this story. This is not a story of glory or banners waving. It is not the kind of tale you read in history books, and you will not find it carved into marble monuments. It is the kind of story that lives in the shadows, whispered among those who were there, carried by the few who saw the impossible become real. There was one night when everything changed. One night when the weight of all their doubts pressed down on me and I decided to answer it with steel and fire. They said no one could make that shot. They were right in a way. No one could except the one they thought was no one at all. I pulled the trigger once and 2 men fell. A single breath, a single bullet, 2 lives erased in the silence of the dark. That was the night they stopped laughing. That was the night they began to understand who I really was. I tell you this not to seek praise or recognition. Those things never came. They never will. What I am sharing with you is a memory carried by countless veterans who know what it feels like to be unseen, unrecognized, but never unimportant. For me, that one shot was not about revenge on the enemy. It was a kind of answer to every voice that said I did not belong. You are watching Military Revenge, a place where the forgotten stories of soldiers live again. If you believe in honoring the courage of those who served in silence, if you want to hear the truths that never made headlines, then stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and walk beside me through the shadows, because sometimes it is in the quietest places that you find the loudest truths. I grew up in a place where people did not dream about medals or uniforms. My hometown in Texas was the kind of place where mornings started with the sound of trucks on gravel roads and ended with the smell of fried food drifting from open windows. My family was ordinary, maybe even invisible. My father fixed cars in a garage that barely kept the lights on, and my mother taught high school science to kids who cared more about Friday night football than physics. No one in my family ever wore a uniform or spoke about service. Military tradition was something we saw on television during parades, not in our kitchen. But I was restless. I wanted more than small town routines and the endless rhythm of scraping by. Maybe it was my father's stubborn hands that taught me how to keep trying when everything was falling apart, or my mother's voice that explained how the universe worked in numbers and laws you could almost touch. Either way, I carried a hunger in me, and hunger will push you places comfort never can. When I signed the enlistment papers, my mother's eyes filled with quiet worry. She hid it behind a nod, but I could see it. My father only said, "You better learn to shoot straight, kid." Then he handed me the old hunting rifle we had used out on the back fields. That was his way of saying he believed in me. The first day of training was supposed to be a fresh start. I arrived at the base with my hair pulled tight, my boots polished, my heart pounding with a mix of pride and fear. I was not prepared for the way the others looked at me. The smirks, the whispers, the rolled eyes when my name was called Carter, female. They sized me up as if they had already decided what box to put me in. Too soft, too small, too fragile. Drill sergeants did not spare me either. They barked louder in my direction, as if daring me to collapse. Every mistake was magnified, every hesitation became proof that I did not belong. I told myself it was part of the process, that everyone was pushed to the edge. But late at night, when my body ached and my bunk felt colder than the concrete beneath us, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was the mistake. One memory still burns in me. It was during marksmanship training, a day so hot the air shimmered above the range. We were lined up, rifles ready. Targets set at distances that separated the skilled from the shaky. My hands did not tremble, but the weight of every eye behind me did. The instructor, a man with a jaw carved out of stone, barked at me to prove myself. I inhaled, lined up the sight, and pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, a clean miss. The laughter came fast, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. A few muttered jokes about girls and guns, one voice whispering maybe she should stick to cooking. I wanted to turn and fire back with words, but my throat locked. All I could do was reload and aim again. But by then, the seed of doubt had been planted. The next shot was closer, but still off. That day, I walked off the line, branded in their minds as the girl who could not hit the broadside of a barn. I carried that humiliation back to the barracks, where jokes followed me like shadows. Some said I got in because of a quota, others claimed I would never last a deployment. It did not matter what I had done before or what I might do next. In their eyes, I was already a failure. But what they did not know was that I had grown up with failure as a companion. My father never fixed a car on the first try. Bolts broke, engines stalled, tools slipped, but he never stopped. He cursed, he bled, he tried again until the engine finally roared. My mother's lessons were the same. She told me even the laws of physics are built on trial and error. Mistakes are not the end, she said, they are the map. So while the others laughed, I began to study. I studied the wind like my mother had taught me to study weather patterns for her science classes. I studied my breathing like my father studied the rhythm of an engine, knowing that one small adjustment could mean the difference between silence and power. I missed shots in public, but in private I learned. And sometimes being invisible is a gift because no one sees the work you are doing until it is too late. The next week during training, we were tested again. The targets were smaller, the range longer. I told myself this was my chance. My rifle felt steady, my eyes locked on the shape in the distance. I fired and missed. Again, the chuckles rose behind me like a cruel chorus. Even the instructor shook his head. The mark was etched deeper into my skin. Failure. What they never saw was that I had deliberately chosen to miss. It sounds foolish, maybe even reckless, but I knew if I showed my hand too soon, they would never let me be. I wanted them to keep looking away, to dismiss me, because sometimes the only way to move unseen is to convince the world you are not worth watching. It was not easy to carry that mask. Each insult chipped at me, each failure in their eyes weighed down my shoulders. But beneath it all, I was building something they could not see. I was building patience. And patience, I would learn, is sharper than any bullet. If you are still listening, know this. Sometimes the road to proving yourself begins with letting others believe you are less than you are. It hurts, it burns, but it also gives you space to grow without the spotlight blinding you. That was the lesson I carried through those months of training, a lesson that would later mean the difference between life and death. When the selection for specialized units came, I did not make the cut. They told me flat out I was not ready, not sharp enough, not strong enough. They sent me to support roles, the kind of assignments where no one expects heroics. That was the moment I realized I was officially an outsider, not part of the elite. Not part of the ones they whispered about with respect. Just another name in the roster, filed away. But if you think that was the end of my story, you are wrong. That was only the beginning. They thought pushing me to the margins would break me. They were wrong. There is something about being underestimated that either crushes you or frees you. For me, it was the latter. Once the pressure of expectation lifted, I found room to breathe. In the quiet of those forgotten roles, I started to see details others missed. I was sent to handle logistics, to carry crates, to set up observation posts. It was grunt work, far from the adrenaline of elite exercises. Yet in those long hours, away from watchful eyes, I built my own education. I studied wind currents with strips of cloth tied to branches, measured distances with my own stride until I could feel 100 yards in the rhythm of my steps. I learned the language of terrain, how valleys curved sound, how ridges bent light. Every shift became a classroom, every mistake became a teacher. At night, I returned to the rifle. I would find the edge of the range when the others were gone. The world hushed, the sky a vast blanket of stars. Alone, I tested myself. I adjusted for wind, for angle, for the trembling pulse in my wrist. My bullets began to strike true one after another as if the targets and I shared a secret. No one clapped, no one noticed, but I did, and that was enough. Still, the jokes lingered. During mess hall meals, I heard the laughter when my name came up. She missed at 20 yards, remember. One said I would never see combat. Another swore he would bet his paycheck that I would quit before the year ended. I smiled, I ate in silence, I let them talk. If they wanted me invisible, then invisible I would be. My father's voice often returned to me in those days. I remembered how he crouched beside me in the tall grass back home, handing me that battered rifle. He never taught me in the language of soldiers. He spoke in the plain words of a mechanic. Feel the balance, he would say. Just like you feel the balance of a wrench in your palm. Do not fight the rifle, work with it, and breathe like you are listening to the engine of the earth. My mother's lessons wove into those memories as well. She explained how even the smallest force follows a law, how gravity bends paths, how air can carry weight you cannot see. She told me that equations were not just numbers, they were stories of how the world moved. When I squeezed a trigger, those stories whispered to me. One day during a training exercise, an unexpected moment arrived. Our unit simulated a patrol under ambush. The instructors staged it to test quick thinking. We were pinned behind cover, targets popping up on the ridge line. Everyone returned fire in chaos. My rifle lay at my side and instinct guided my hands. I aimed at a target no one else even saw, a silhouette barely visible through brush. I squeezed and the silhouette fell. The instructor paused, surprised, but before he could say anything, another target rose. This time I missed deliberately. The laughter followed. They shook their heads and marked it down as another failure. What they never knew was that my first shot had been perfect. That night, lying in my bunk, I thought about why I held back. The truth was simple. If I revealed myself too soon, they would take control of my future. They would use me, brand me, shape me into their version of a weapon. And I wanted more than that. I wanted to choose my moment. The months passed and the division between us grew. The men bonded over stories, over victories in training. I was rarely included. My name faded from their conversations as if I were already gone. Sometimes I felt the weight of isolation pressing hard. It is one thing to be alone by choice. It is another to be made invisible. I told myself to hold steady, that patience would carry me through, yet there were nights when I questioned everything. I recall one evening in particular. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in fire. I sat alone near the range, rifle across my lap. I thought of leaving, of walking away and never returning. But then I looked through the scope and the world sharpened. The horizon stretched wide. The target far in the distance stood like a challenge. I steadied my breath, felt the earth beneath me, and fired. The shot rang true, splitting the center of the mark. The sound echoed like a promise. I knew then that I was not finished. My reputation among them remained what it was. The mistake, the girl who missed. They teased me during drills, doubted me during planning, overlooked me during assignments. And yet, beneath their scorn, I was gathering strength. Every slight was fuel, every sneer was a spark. They thought they were burying me. In reality, they were planting me deeper. In time, a new set of evaluations arrived. The top performers were handpicked for advanced sniper training. I knew I would not be chosen. My record was stained with misses, my name dismissed before the list was even made. When the selections were posted, my absence was no surprise. They walked proudly, chest out, certain of their worth. I stayed behind, relegated to support duty, and so my place was set. I carried gear, logged reports, scouted positions. No one expected brilliance from me, no one feared failure either. I was simply there. That invisibility, once a curse, began to feel like armor. Because when no one is watching you, you are free to see everything. Looking back now, I understand that those months of ridicule and dismissal were the foundation of everything that came after. Had they welcomed me, I might have grown careless. Had they praised me, I might have chased recognition instead of precision. Instead, I learned humility, patience, and the art of silence. I know some of you listening may wonder why I tolerated it, why I did not demand respect. The truth is, respect forced is never real. I wanted respect forged in the undeniable. And that meant waiting, enduring, biding my time until the moment arrived when there would be no denying what I could do. By the time training ended, I was officially stamped as ordinary. They gave me a role in a unit, but not one of prestige. No one predicted my name would echo in secret halls years later. No one imagined the quiet girl from Texas would shape the fate of missions whispered about in classified rooms. That chapter of humiliation closed with me standing in formation, listening to the names of those chosen for honors. My name was not called. My chest was heavy, my pride buried deep. Yet as I stood there, I felt a strange calm. They thought they had written my ending. What they did not see was that I had just begun my own story. If you are still with me now, take this to heart. Being cast aside does not mean you are finished. Sometimes the ones who seem the weakest are simply the ones saving their strength for when it matters most. That was the lesson I carried out of training, and it would guide me into the battles ahead. They placed me in logistics and technical support, the kind of assignments no one fights for. My job was to move crates, repair radios, and document the endless flow of supplies. It was work that smelled of sweat and grease, far from the front lines where reputations were built. Some soldiers carried stories of firefights in their eyes. I carried clipboards and spare batteries. It is easy to disappear when no one expects anything of you. They did not watch me. They did not ask questions. They dismissed me with a shrug and forgot I was even there. In the daylight, I blended into the background, a shadow passing between tasks. But at night, when the world grew quiet, I stepped into another life. The range became my refuge. While others slept, I learned to listen to the wind. I would lay on the dirt, cheek pressed against the stock of my rifle, watching the stars drift above me. Every shot was a conversation between me and forces older than war itself. Wind pressed against the bullet like an unseen hand. Humidity thickened the air. Temperature bent the path of steel. I wrote everything down in notebooks, page after page of calculations that looked less like soldiers' notes and more like my mother's physics homework. Sometimes I failed. Shots veered wide, formulas proved wrong. Frustration cut deep. And I would taste bitterness on my tongue as if failure itself had weight. Yet I kept going, because beneath the sting of doubt, I carried an ache stronger than anger. I wanted to prove I was not the mistake they thought I was. In silence, I built rituals. I trained my breath until I could slow my heart to a rhythm so quiet it felt like the earth itself was listening. I practiced holding my body perfectly still, hour after hour, until even the smallest twitch disappeared. When dawn broke, I would return to my bunk before anyone noticed. To them, I was still invisible. To me, I was becoming something else entirely. The isolation gnawed at me. Days were long, filled with menial tasks and the constant reminder that I was not considered elite. The laughter had quieted by then, but silence can be sharper than ridicule. It told me I did not matter. And yet, inside, the fire burned hotter. I was not chasing their respect anymore. I was chasing my own worth. Then came the exercise that changed everything. We were running a simulation in rough terrain, a mock patrol meant to test awareness. The scenario was simple: move, observe, report. No one expected trouble. I was positioned in the rear, carrying extra gear as usual. The ambush came sudden. Pop-up targets erupted on the ridge, simulating enemy fire. Soldiers dove for cover, returning shots in bursts of panic. Amid the chaos, I spotted movement on the far slope, a figure nearly invisible against the rocks. No one else saw it. My rifle was already up before I realized what I was doing. Breath in, exhale. The shot cracked across the valley. The figure dropped. The silence that followed was different. Heads turned. The instructor narrowed his eyes. My unit stared as if unsure what they had just witnessed. For a brief moment, I thought they would see me for who I was, but then the chatter started. Someone said it was luck. Another laughed that even a broken clock was right twice a day. The instructor shrugged and called it a fluke. My single clean shot was buried under their disbelief, and just like that, the moment slipped away. That night, I lay awake replaying it over and over. The feel of the trigger, the line of the sight, the perfect arc of the bullet. I knew it had not been luck. It had been the sum of every night spent in silence, every calculation scribbled in my notebook, every moment of invisible training. But to them, it was chance. I realized then that proving myself would take more than one moment. It would take a chance so undeniable, so impossible, that no one could laugh it away. Until then, I would remain in the shadows, building, waiting. Patience had carried me this far. It would carry me farther. If you are listening now, remember this. Sometimes the world will erase your victories before the echo fades. Do not let that erasure convince you that they are not real. Truth does not depend on applause. It waits, steady, until the day it cannot be denied. The day after that exercise, nothing changed. The others carried on as though the shot I had taken was already erased. I lifted crates, checked supply lists, and was treated the same as before. A few smirks lingered, a few careless jokes, but mostly I was ignored. That should have broken me. Instead, it clarified something sharp inside me. I understood I would not win their respect with one bullet. I needed a moment so undeniable that even the loudest skeptic would be left silent. So I kept to my secret rituals. After long days of hauling equipment, I would slip into the night with my rifle. I tested distances beyond the official range, pushing myself farther each time. I learned to read the way leaves trembled when the wind shifted. I studied the arc of birds overhead, measuring how the air carried their wings. I timed my breath to the rhythm of the earth. All of it went into my notebook. My mother's voice echoed in my head, reminding me that numbers told stories if you paid attention. My father's lessons reminded me that broken things can always be rebuilt. There were nights when exhaustion pressed so heavy I thought my bones would splinter. But still I practiced, because in those quiet hours I could feel myself changing. The doubt that had once dragged me down was reshaped into discipline. Every failure became part of the formula, each miscalculation that brought me closer to perfection. The others never noticed, but occasionally one or two caught me in fleeting moments. Once a younger recruit stumbled on me at the edge of the range just as I landed a shot that split the target clean. His eyes widened, but when we returned to camp, he said nothing. Maybe he thought no one would believe him. Maybe he understood that some truths are safer kept quiet. Then came another exercise, and with it another chance. We were simulating a night patrol. The unit was spread thin, nerves stretched tight in the dark. Suddenly, simulated fire erupted from hidden positions. Chaos took over again. My role was not to engage, only to observe and record. But as the shouting rose, I spotted the faintest silhouette moving against the moonlight. It was a target no one else saw. My hands moved before thought. I raised my rifle, calculated quickly, and fired. The silhouette dropped. For a heartbeat, the chaos froze. Then the simulation ended. My shot had been the one that decided the exercise. My instructor's eyes met mine, hard and unblinking. He asked how I saw it. I told him I had just noticed the movement. He nodded once, then turned away. The others muttered, called it another lucky break. My skill, once again, was buried under the weight of disbelief. That night, sitting alone with my rifle, I felt the ache of invisibility deepen. How many times would I have to prove myself before they saw me? How many shots before they stopped calling it luck? I wanted to scream, to demand recognition. But instead, I opened my notebook and kept writing, because anger fades, but preparation endures. The truth was that I had become obsessed. I was not training anymore. I was chasing something larger than skill. I wanted control over the chaos, mastery over the very forces that shaped the bullet's flight, the wind, the temperature, the pull of the earth itself. I wanted to bend them to my will. Night after night, I drilled. Until calculations became instinct, and instinct became something close to art. Still, there was a hollowness. Without a defining moment, without proof undeniable, it was as if none of it existed, and that hunger gnawed at me. I began to imagine what it would take, not another exercise, not another simulation, something real, something with stakes high enough that when I pulled the trigger, no one could ever again say it was luck. That chance came sooner than I expected. We were running a routine drill when the unexpected happened. A piece of equipment malfunctioned, stranding part of the team in a vulnerable position. A simulated enemy squad emerged and panic rippled through the line. From my position, I could see that two of my teammates were exposed. If the drill had been live fire, they would have been finished. My chest tightened and instinct again took over. I raised my rifle, measured in an instant, and fired. The simulated enemy dropped before they could close in. When it ended, my teammates looked at me differently. Not all of them, but the two whose lives I had just protected carried an expression I had never seen before. It was not admiration exactly. It was a flicker of gratitude, quickly hidden. But gratitude is a quiet acknowledgement of truth. For the first time, I felt a crack in the wall of disbelief. Of course, the whispers started again. Some said I had guessed right. Others said the instructors had staged it to give me confidence. The word luck clung to me like smoke, yet I did not care as much as before, because I had seen it in their eyes. Even if they buried it under jokes, they knew. That was when the realization settled over me with heavy clarity. I could train forever, I could stack perfect shot on perfect shot, but none of it would matter until the right moment came. Only one opportunity, undeniable, in the heart of real battle would erase the doubt. Until then, I would remain the mistake in their eyes. So I chose patience once more. I continued to carry boxes, to take the roles no one else wanted. I stayed quiet in the mess hall, listening more than I spoke, but at night I was relentless. I pushed past exhaustion, past comfort. My rifle became more than steel. It became an extension of every scar, every humiliation, every unanswered question of worth. I remember one dawn, standing at the edge of the range, watching the sun climb over the horizon. My hands were raw, my eyes heavy, but my spirit was steady. I whispered to myself that when the moment came, I would not miss, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because every breath, every tear, every night of invisibility had led me there. By the time our unit moved into real deployment, I was no longer the girl who had missed at the range. At least not inside. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I was still assigned to support roles, still overlooked. But inside, I carried a certainty that no one could take from me. A storm had been forged in silence, and it was only waiting for the right place to break. That is how Chapter 2 of my life closed. In shadows, in silence, in endless nights of practice no one saw. I had saved lives in training, I had carved precision into my bones, and yet I remained unseen. But that was fine, because the greatest truths often begin in silence. And I knew one day when the chance came, the silence would end with a single shot that no one could ever forget. If you have followed me this far, know this truth: sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones earned in the dark, long before anyone is watching. The world may dismiss you, but the work you put in when no one cares will one day echo louder than all the doubts combined. And when that echo comes, it will be undeniable. The first time I was sent into real combat, I believed I was ready. Years of silent training, endless nights under the stars, the whispered promise I made to myself that when the moment came I would not miss. All of it built toward that day, but war has a way of turning even the strongest vows into smoke. Our unit had been deployed to a contested valley, a stretch of dirt and stone where silence never lasted long. My assignment was not glamorous. I was positioned as an observer, tasked with scanning ridges and relaying what I saw. In theory, it was important, but in practice, it felt like a way to keep me out of the way. I carried a rifle, but my orders were clear: do not fire unless commanded. Watch, report, nothing more. At first, it was uneventful. The air was dry, the sun sharp, and the valley stretched wide before us. I took notes, traced angles, recorded distances. My radio crackled occasionally, reminding me that I was only a set of eyes, not a weapon. The others patrolled ahead, laughing, swearing, kicking dust as if danger was miles away. Then everything shifted. The first shots cracked from the ridge, echoing like thunder. I spotted movement immediately, shadows flanking us, rifles glinting. My instincts screamed. My body tensed the way it had in every secret night of training. My finger found the trigger. One breath and I could end it before it began. But the order came through sharp and cold. Hold fire, observe only. The words cut through me like a blade. I watched as the enemy advanced. I shouted coordinates into the radio, my voice shaking, but it was too late. Bullets tore into the air. My unit scrambled for cover, confusion flooding the valley. Men I had lived beside for months crumpled to the ground. One screamed a name I will never forget. Blood spread across the dirt faster than my brain could process. Still, the radio echoed in my ear. Do not fire, maintain position. I obeyed. That was the worst part. I obeyed. My hands trembled around the rifle, my vision locked on a target I could have dropped, but I did nothing. Discipline caged me, and inside that cage my brothers fell. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than the gunfire. Bodies were carried out, bandages wrapped, curses muttered under breath, and then the eyes turned to me. They did not see someone who had followed orders. They saw a soldier who had frozen, who had done nothing while blood soaked the valley. Whispers spread like fire. She is useless. She did not lift a finger. She let them die. The weight of those words pressed harder than any uniform I had ever worn. I tried to explain. I said I was under orders. I said I was told not to shoot. But the faces around me were carved with grief and anger, and grief is never rational. To them, my silence was betrayal. That night, I could not look at my rifle. I sat in the dark, shaking, replaying every second. The target I could have ended. The breath I could have taken. The shot I could have fired. All of it burned inside me until the shame was unbearable. For the first time, I wondered if they had been right all along. Maybe I was the mistake they believed me to be. Maybe all my silent training had been a delusion. The next day was worse. The whispers turned to accusations. Some spat the word coward. Others called me dead weight. One soldier, his arm still wrapped in bandages, told me outright that my inaction had killed his friend. I tried to swallow it, but his words carved into me so deep I could feel the scar forming. For days I thought of quitting, walking away, leaving the uniform behind and disappearing back into a life where failure was private, not public. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the valley. I heard the shots. I smelled the blood, and I saw myself frozen, obeying orders while others paid the price. But war does not pause for your grief. Orders came down, new assignments were given, and I was swept along by the tide. Our unit was called to a briefing, the room heavy with tension. The commanding officer stood at the front, his face unreadable. He spoke of a high-value target, an enemy figure who had eluded every attempt at capture. The mission was simple on paper: eliminate him. The complication was distance. He operated from a stronghold beyond the range of standard tactics. The room buzzed with disbelief. The numbers he gave were impossible by conventional standards. No one could make that shot, not with the wind, not with the terrain, not with the laws of physics pressing against every bullet. I felt every eye slide past me, dismissing me before I even considered raising my hand. My reputation was shattered, my name a joke whispered in corners. But inside me, something stirred. That old vow, the one I made under the stars, came alive again. One shot, undeniable, one chance to erase everything. The commander looked around the room, waiting for volunteers. No one spoke. The silence was thick. And in that silence, I knew this was it. The moment I had trained for in shadows, the moment I had built in silence while no one watched. My heart pounded. My hands steadied, and before I could second-guess myself, I stepped forward. The silence after I stepped forward felt heavier than the gunfire that had scarred the valley. My commander's eyes narrowed as if he were trying to measure not just my skill, but my worth. Around me the room shifted, soldiers exchanging glances, some with disbelief, others with open contempt. One muttered under his breath that the girl who froze was now volunteering for the impossible. Another laughed softly, the kind of laugh that cuts deeper than any insult. I kept my spine straight. My voice didn't shake when I said I could take the shot. I explained, not boastfully but calmly, that I had studied distances like these. That wind, humidity, and the curvature of the earth were numbers I carried in my head like a second language. The commander listened, stone-faced, but I saw doubt swimming behind his eyes. He asked me one question: why should I trust you? 1,000 answers burned in my throat, because I have trained when no one was watching, because every failure has carved me into steel, because I am not what they think I am. But all I said was, because I won't fail again. The room stayed quiet, waiting. The commander didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't show any sign of approval. He simply wrote my name down and ended the briefing. The decision was made, whether anyone liked it or not. That night, sleep did not come. I lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp, every distant footstep, every metallic clang of a rifle being cleaned. Shame still gnawed at me, the memory of the valley still haunting me like a ghost that refused to leave. But beneath it, something else had taken root, a steady burn, not of anger but of resolve. This was not just another mission. This was my chance to claw back the respect I had lost, to prove to them and to myself that I belonged. I thought of my father again, of those endless hunting trips when he would make me wait hours for the perfect shot. Patience, he would say. The world will test you, Evelyn. It will see if you are willing to break before it gives you what you want. And my mother's voice echoed too, reminding me that math was not just numbers, but the language of the universe. That if you listened closely enough, you could predict even the chaos of wind. Those voices, once faint, roared inside me now, filling the silence. The mission details came down in fragments. The target was a high-ranking strategist who had orchestrated ambushes costing dozens of lives. He was known for his arrogance, often appearing near windows during briefings, confident that no bullet could reach him. His compound was perched on a ridge, fortified and crawling with guards. No team could breach without losing half their men. A single shot from outside their perimeter was the only option. And the distance, over 2,000 yards, longer than any shot I had ever attempted in training, longer than anyone in our unit had even imagined attempting in combat. That number echoed in my head like a drum beat. 2,000. Impossible, they whispered. Perfect, I thought. The days before the mission stretched endlessly. I prepared in silence, knowing every eye was on me, waiting for me to crack. Some whispered that I was being set up to fail, that the commander had only agreed because he wanted me to bury myself in humiliation. Maybe they were right, but each night I went over my calculations again, the way other soldiers prayed. Wind speed, air density, drop rate, spin drift. I filled notebooks with scribbles until my hands cramped, then burned them in the fire so no one would see. Still, doubt crept in. Late at night, I asked myself the questions no one else could hear. What if they were right? What if I missed? What if I froze again? Each question cut deeper than the last. But then I remembered the faces in the valley, the blood on the dirt, the accusations that still rang in my ears. I had been powerless once. I refused to be powerless again. On the morning of the mission, the sky was unnervingly clear, a pale canvas stretched over the mountains. Our team moved into position with practiced silence. I carried my rifle close, the familiar weight both comforting and terrifying. Every step up the rocky incline reminded me of what was at stake. Failure meant more than embarrassment now. Failure meant lives lost, a mission destroyed, and my final chance erased forever. We reached the observation point hours before the meeting was expected to begin. I set up, adjusting the bipod on the uneven ground, pressing my cheek against the stock. Through the scope, the compound looked small, almost insignificant, but I knew better. Inside those walls were men who had orchestrated chaos, who believed themselves untouchable. My heart hammered, but my breathing slowed as I aligned my sights. Behind me, whispers again. I could hear them even when they tried to be quiet. She is wasting our time. She will miss. She will choke. I blocked it out, retreating inward into the place where numbers ruled and emotion was muted. Distance, wind, temperature. My mind became a calculator, every factor reduced to something solvable. Hours passed, shadows shifted, then movement. A window slid open and the target appeared, tall, confident, his hands gesturing as he spoke to those inside. He believed he was safe. I tracked him, aligning my scope, feeling my muscles coil. This was it. The moment my entire life had been pressing toward. But just as I steadied my aim, a voice crackled in my earpiece. Hold fire, not yet. The words froze me. Again, the command to wait. Again, the cage snapping shut around me. My breath caught. Images of the valley stormed back, of men falling while I obeyed. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the memory of that helplessness. I whispered, barely audible. He is in position. I can take the shot. The reply came cold. Hold your position. We wait for confirmation. Every second dragged like an eternity. Through my scope, the target leaned closer to the table, laughing. Guards shifted at the windows. My gut screamed that this was the moment, that if I waited he would vanish back into the safety of stone walls. Doubt clawed at me. If I disobeyed and missed, I would be finished. But if I obeyed and lost the chance, I would be nothing more than what they already believed. I pressed my cheek harder to the stock, every muscle taut. The memory of blood in the valley surged up, colliding with the vow I had made. Not again, not this time. The radio buzzed again, but I shut it out. My finger tightened on the trigger. My breath slowed. One heartbeat, two. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the man who believed himself untouchable. And in that fragile sliver of time, I chose. The shot itself belongs to another chapter, but the choice was born here. In the silence after public failure, in the ashes of humiliation, in the cage of obedience I shattered when I pulled the trigger. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. But sometimes failure is the crucible. Sometimes it is the valley of shame that gives you the fire to rise. And this mission, impossible as it seemed, was about to prove it. The silence before I pulled the trigger was almost holy. No radio chatter, no whispers of doubt, just the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I had shut out the command that told me to wait, shut out the memories of failure, shut out the voices that called me useless. All that remained was the line of sight between me and the man who believed he was safe. Through my scope, the air shimmered in the heat, but I read it like text on a page. Wind, speed, distance. Humidity, my mind traced the bullet's arc as if it had already happened, the math clear and merciless. And then, as if fate had decided to test me one final time, another figure stepped into frame. Not a guard, not a soldier, but another officer, his chest broad, his voice raised as he leaned over the map. They stood close, shoulders aligned, two silhouettes against the pale stone wall. For a split second, I hesitated, then realization struck me like lightning. If I placed the shot perfectly, if I trusted the math down to the last decimal, one round could end 2 lives. It was madness. No training manual, no sniper school, no doctrine on earth taught such a thing. It was too risky, too ambitious. Miss by an inch and both men would walk away, but if I succeeded, it would be a moment carved into history. 1 bullet, 2 kills. I exhaled slowly, feeling my body settle into that stillness I had chased my entire life. My finger tightened, every nerve in my body aligning with the steel and powder in my hands. In that instant, I was not the failure from the valley. I was not the girl mocked in training. I was the sum of every hour spent in the dark, every calculation scribbled in secret, every vow whispered under the stars. The rifle roared. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, the sound cracking across the mountains like thunder. My scope trembled, then steadied. And I saw it unfold with chilling clarity. The first officer jerked backward, the round tearing through him. And before the disbelief could even register on his comrade's face, the bullet found him too. Two bodies collapsed almost in unison, crashing over the map table, red blooming against the pale stone. For a heartbeat, the compound froze. Guards spun in confusion, searching the ridges, shouting in panic. But inside the scope, I saw only stillness. Two men who had orchestrated ambushes, who had sent countless soldiers to their deaths, now silenced by one round. Behind me, nothing, not a word, not a breath. My team, men who had laughed, doubted, dismissed me, were stunned into silence. I broke position quickly, chambering another round, eyes scanning for movement. But deep inside, a surge of something I could not name thundered through me. Relief, vindication. Rage turned into justice. Finally, one voice whispered, almost reverent, "Impossible." I didn't answer. I just adjusted my scope again, scanning for secondary targets, refusing to let myself sink into the shock. But in my chest, the fire burned hotter. It wasn't just the kills, it was what they meant. Proof, evidence written in blood and stone that I was more than what they thought. Within minutes, chaos erupted inside the compound. Guards scrambled, shouting into radios, dragging the bodies from the window. My commander's voice finally returned to the radio, but it cracked with disbelief. "Did you confirm?" I answered without hesitation. One bullet, two targets, both neutralized. The silence that followed felt different from the silence after the valley. This silence was not accusation, it was awe. I broke down my position with methodical calm, my hands moving faster than my thoughts. The others began to move too, falling back toward extraction. Still, no one spoke to me. They looked at me differently, eyes darting away as if they had glimpsed something they weren't sure they understood. Respect mixed with fear. On the hike back, the tension clung to us like fog. Finally, one soldier, the same who had once called me dead weight, muttered under his breath, "One bullet, two lives." His tone wasn't mocking this time, it was wonder. When we reached the rendezvous point, the commander pulled me aside. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "What you did was reckless," he said. "If you had missed, it would have been a disaster." I nodded because he was right. But then his eyes softened just slightly and he added, "But you didn't miss." That was the only acknowledgement I received, but it was enough because I knew and they knew. Legends are not declared with medals. They are born in silence, in the spaces where the impossible becomes undeniable. That night, as we moved under the cover of darkness toward safety, I let myself breathe again. My body ached, my hands trembled now that the adrenaline had drained away. But my mind replayed the shot, the arc, the math, the impossible line that had become real. One round, two lives. Somewhere deep inside, a whisper rose, "You did it, not for glory. Not for recognition, but because you refused to be what they said you were." And though I knew the official record would never acknowledge what had happened, though the world would never hear my name in the headlines, I also knew that history had shifted in that moment. For the enemy, for my team, for me. Because sometimes a single act can rewrite everything, and this was mine. The march back to the extraction point should have been routine, but nothing felt ordinary after what had happened. Every crunch of gravel beneath our boots, every shift of shadow across the ridge carried a weight it had never held before. I could feel their eyes on me even when they tried to look elsewhere. The same men who once dismissed me as a burden now moved in silence, as if afraid to say the wrong thing, as if they had glimpsed something they couldn't name. I didn't speak. My rifle rested against my shoulder, the steel still warm from the shot. I had cleaned it in silence, reassembled it in silence, and now carried it as if it were no more remarkable than a hammer. But inside me the memory replayed again and again, the impossible line of trajectory, the perfect alignment, the collapse of two bodies in the same instant. It felt unreal even to me, as though I had imagined it. Halfway down the trail, Sergeant Davis broke the silence. He had been the loudest critic, the one who called me dead weight after the valley. His voice now was low, almost grudging. "I don't know how you did it, Carter, but you did." No one else said anything, but I caught the flicker in their expressions. They were not ready to admit it aloud, not yet, but they knew, and the knowledge unsettled them. Respect was easy when it fit within the boundaries of their world. What I had done stepped outside those boundaries. It forced them to reconsider everything they believed about me and maybe even about themselves. By the time we reached the rendezvous point, the radio was alive with coded chatter. Command had confirmed the kills, intelligence channels buzzing with disbelief. The enemy compound had gone dark, their communications scrambled. Two of their senior officers, men who had orchestrated countless ambushes, were gone in a single breath. The balance of the region had shifted, and it all traced back to one shot. Our commander pulled me aside again. His words were measured, his tone clipped, but I could see it in his eyes. The calculation, the quiet awe he tried to hide. That was not regulation, Carter. That was not by the book, but it worked. His jaw tightened. We may never speak of this again, but you should know you just changed the course of this war. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply said, "Understood, sir." Because I had learned long ago that glory was not for people like me. My name would not appear in reports. There would be no medal pinned to my chest, no ceremony back home. Officially, I was an observer, a ghost, and maybe that was fitting. Legends do not always need names. Sometimes the story is enough. When we returned to base, the atmosphere was strange. Soldiers stared as we passed, whispers following us like shadows. No one had seen the shot except those who had been there, but rumors spread faster than bullets. Some said I had dropped the targets with 2 separate rounds in the span of a heartbeat. Others insisted it was a fluke, blind luck that no one should celebrate. The truth was too unbelievable to fit neatly into their stories. That night I sat alone, disassembling and cleaning my rifle again and again until my fingers ached. Each piece of steel slid into place with a satisfying click, as if reminding me that what had happened was not magic. It was not luck. It was math. It was training. It was me. Still, I felt the weight of it pressing down. 2 men gone in a blink, their lives, their voices, their power erased by a single decision. I had told myself it was justice, that it was necessary to save lives, but the truth lingered heavier. Killing is never clean, no matter how necessary. It leaves marks you can't wash away, echoes that linger in your chest long after the sound of the rifle fades. I closed my eyes and saw their faces again, the way their bodies folded, and I heard my father's voice from years ago when he handed me my first rifle. Every bullet you fire, Evelyn, is a promise. Once you pull that trigger, you cannot take it back. That night, I understood those words more than ever before. The days that followed blurred into routine, patrols, briefings, the endless rhythm of war. But everywhere I went, I felt the shift. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Men who once mocked me now avoided my eyes. A few nodded respectfully, but most simply kept their distance. It wasn't camaraderie, it was something colder, sharper, respect mixed with unease. I overheard 2 soldiers whispering one evening by the mess tent. One said, "She isn't normal." The other replied, "Maybe not, but she gets the job done." Their words cut both ways. I had earned respect, but it was the kind reserved for something dangerous. Something you admired but did not fully trust. Even my commander looked at me differently now. During debriefings, his eyes lingered longer, his tone softened when he addressed me, but he never spoke of the shot again. It was as if by refusing to acknowledge it, he could contain it, keep it from spilling into the official record. I understood, some truths are too heavy for paper. One evening, Davis approached me. The same man who had once mocked me now stood with his hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets, his voice quiet. "I misjudged you," he said. "Out there in the valley, I was wrong. You're no coward." He paused, searching for words. "What you did, it was something else." I met his eyes and simply nodded. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but in that moment I saw the weight he carried too. We were all marked by this war in different ways. Maybe his shame was as heavy as mine. News of the kills spread beyond our unit. Other soldiers from nearby outposts came searching for the story, eager to hear how one bullet had ended 2 lives. I said nothing. I let them tell their own versions, each one more elaborate than the last. I didn't correct them, didn't claim ownership. Sometimes silence tells the loudest story of all. But in quiet corners, in the spaces where soldiers gathered to trade rumors, a name began to grow. They didn't call me Evelyn, they didn't even call me Carter. They whispered a word that carried more weight than any title I had ever held. Ghost, because I had appeared from nothing, made the impossible real and vanished again into silence. I didn't embrace it, but I didn't deny it either. Legends, I was beginning to realize, are not chosen. They are assigned, built from fragments of truth and wrapped in whispers until they take on a life of their own. And whether I liked it or not, I was becoming one. Still inside me, the doubt lingered. Was it genius or recklessness? Was it skill or blind fortune? I turned the questions over in my mind, searching for answers that never came. But perhaps it didn't matter. The result was undeniable. 1 bullet, 2 lives. And no one could take that away. Weeks later, during a routine patrol, one of the younger soldiers asked me outright, "How did you do it? How did you line them up like that?" I looked at him for a long moment, then said simply, "It wasn't luck, it was math." His eyes widened as if the explanation only deepened the mystery, and maybe that was the truth of it. To me, it was calculation, patience, the application of everything I had studied in silence. To them, it was magic. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy quiet, I thought about the weight of legend. It isolates you, sets you apart, makes you something more than human in the eyes of others. But I was not more than human. I was just a woman who had refused to let her failures define her. The world might never know my name. History books would not print my story. Official records would mark the mission as routine, an operation with no shots fired. But I knew, my team knew. And somewhere deep in enemy territory, the ripple of my bullet was still spreading, reshaping the war in ways none of us could yet see. And in the silence of that night, I whispered the truth to myself. 1 bullet, 2 lives, 1 legend. When we returned from that mission, I expected nothing. And in a way, that's exactly what I got. No medals, no speeches, no ceremony on a parade field where names are read and flags are folded. The official report didn't even mention my trigger pull. According to the paperwork, those officers simply never made it out of their compound. It was neat, clean, and bloodless. It was also a lie. That is how shadows work. They erase the details, leaving only an outline. And even then, only for those who know how to look. My name disappeared from the briefings. The file that held my service records suddenly had blank pages where dates and places used to be. It was as though someone had reached inside and scrubbed me out of my own history. I remember sitting in the dim light of the barracks that night, staring at the thin manila folder that bore my name in faded ink, Evelyn Carter. It looked fragile, as if one strong wind could carry it away. The next morning it did. When I went back to check, the folder was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper with a word I hadn't seen before, Hawk, that was all. No first name, no rank, no service branch, just Hawk, a code name, a shadow name. In that moment I realized the shot I had taken hadn't just killed 2 men. It had killed Evelyn Carter, the girl from Texas who everyone doubted. She no longer existed, not in any way that could be proved. All that remained was Hawk, and Hawk was not a person. Hawk was a tool, a weapon, a whisper passed along in silence. At first I fought against it. I went to my commander, demanded answers. Why erase me? Why take my name? He looked at me with something like pity and said, "You were never supposed to be there. That shot was never supposed to happen. But it did, and now it belongs to no one. It has to." He leaned closer then, his voice low. "Between you and me, Carter. You turned the impossible into the inevitable. You did something no one else could. That makes you valuable. But it also makes you dangerous. Do you understand?" I understood too well. Recognition was not safety. Glory was not protection. In our world, those things painted targets on your back. Silence was survival, so I said nothing more. From that day on, I lived in a strange limbo. The men in my unit still looked at me differently. But now their glances carried something beyond respect. Fear. They whispered the name Hawk, but never when I was near. To my face, I was Carter, the quiet one, the support soldier. But in their stories, late at night when rumors traded like currency, I was Hawk, the ghost who had bent the laws of distance and time. And yet inside, I was still me. Still the girl who remembered her father's voice teaching her how to line up a shot across a pasture, who carried her mother's words about patience and precision. I hadn't become a legend to myself. I had only done what I knew I could do. But once a story leaves your lips, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to those who repeat it, and they will twist it to fit their need. There were nights I lay awake listening to the silence, wondering if maybe it was better this way. Maybe the world didn't need to know my name. Maybe it was enough that the people beside me had made it home, that 2 men who spread death would never command again. I didn't need a medal to remind me. The memory was medal enough. Still, there was a loneliness to it. To know that the greatest moment of your life, the moment where you proved yourself, where you turned doubt into thunder, was also the moment you had to bury. I carried that secret like a locked box inside me. Some nights it burned heavy against my ribs. Other nights it felt lighter than air, like maybe it had never happened at all. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, my commander found me sitting alone. He sat beside me, hands folded, eyes fixed on the dirt. "You did something extraordinary," he said quietly, "something we will never put in writing, but I need you to hear this from me. You saved lives that day. You gave us a chance we didn't have." He paused, searching for the right words. "You don't need a medal to know what you did. You don't need your name carved in stone. You carry it already here." He tapped his chest, right over his heart. "That's where legends live." I didn't reply. I just nodded and let the silence sit between us, because he was right. Legends live in hearts, not in files, and maybe that was enough. Over time, the mission faded into the background of the war, swallowed by new battles, new losses, new chaos. Soldiers came and went, some carrying pieces of the story with them, spreading it to new ears. Each retelling bent the truth a little more, until even I wouldn't have recognized myself in it. Some said I had made the shot blindfolded. Others said I had taken 3 lives instead of 2. I didn't correct them. The truth was mine and mine alone. Eventually, the war ended for me. Not with a grand farewell, not with marching bands or flags, just a quiet plane ride home and a discharge form stamped in ink that meant nothing. Evelyn Carter was listed as honorably released, with commendations that read like boilerplate. No mention of Hawk, no mention of the shot. My service was as ordinary on paper as it had once seemed to everyone around me, but I knew better. Back in Texas, people asked me what it had been like, what I had seen, what I had done. I gave them the same answers every veteran learns to give. Hard, long, we lost friends, we tried to do our best. They nodded, sometimes with sympathy, sometimes with polite disinterest, before moving on with their lives. None of them would ever know that in one forgotten corner of the world, on one unmarked night, I had become something more than ordinary. The file with my name may have been erased, but the memory lived on in the men who were there, in the ripple of a war that shifted course. And in me, always in me. I didn't need to say it aloud. But sometimes when I sat alone beneath the wide Texas sky, I whispered it anyway, like a prayer only I could hear. 1 bullet, 2 lives, 1 legend. And though no one else might ever say my name in the same breath as that story, I knew. And that was enough. Coming home felt stranger than any battlefield. War zones, for all their chaos, have a rhythm. You wake, you move, you obey, you fight, you survive. Back in Texas, the world moved on a different beat. People rushed to grocery stores, checked phones, made weekend plans. I walked among them like a ghost wearing borrowed clothes. At first, I thought silence would be easy. After all, I had been living in the shadows for years. But silence outside of war is different. In combat, silence has purpose. It keeps you alive. At home, silence can suffocate. Neighbors asked where I had served, what my job had been, and I offered simple truths. Logistics support. They nodded politely, assuming my service had been ordinary, forgettable, and I let them think that, because the real answer was one they could never understand, or worse, one they would dismiss as impossible. There were nights I dreamt of the shot, the long inhale, the way the crosshairs steadied. The silence after the trigger broke. In my dreams, the 2 men fell in slow motion, as if the world itself bowed to acknowledge what had just happened. Then I would wake, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling fan, realizing that outside of my own memory, the world had forgotten entirely. Sometimes that forgetting felt like freedom. No reporters at my door, no speeches, no medals collecting dust. But other times, it felt like exile. To know that the single act that defined me was hidden away in a classified folder somewhere, never to be spoken of in public. My mother once asked me why I seemed restless, as though I were waiting for something. I almost told her then. I almost let the words slip, told her about Hawk, but instead I smiled and said I was fine. That was the first of many lies I told after the war. The strange thing about being erased is that you start to wonder if you were ever real at all. Some days I convinced myself it had all been a story, a trick of memory born out of exhaustion and dust. But then I would feel the phantom weight of the rifle in my hands, the sting of sweat in my eyes, the cold precision of calculation. I knew it was real. I knew. What no one tells you is that silence can echo louder than sound. It follows you into every corner of your life. When I applied for jobs, I listed my service in broad strokes. Employers nodded, thanked me, and moved on. None of them guessed that a legend sat across from them in a worn blazer and clean shoes. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit at the kitchen table, drinking coffee gone cold, and whisper the name they gave me. Hawk, I hated it, and yet I needed it. It was the only proof I had left that I had once mattered. Loneliness became my constant companion. People think veterans are haunted by what they saw, by the blood and the loss. And that's true, but for me, the haunting was different. It wasn't the men I killed that returned to me. It was the silence afterward. The way no one would ever say aloud what had happened. That silence walked beside me in grocery aisles, sat with me at church, followed me down quiet back roads. Yet with the loneliness came something else. Power, not the kind you boast about, not the kind written in books. A quieter power, one that hums beneath your skin, because I knew what I had done. I knew that in a single breath I had rewritten the outcome of a battle, perhaps even the course of a war. No erasure. No blank file could take that away from me. There were rare moments when someone hinted at the truth. An old comrade passing through town would catch my eye across a crowded bar. No words exchanged, just a nod heavy with memory. In that nod was an entire world, the ridge, the distance, the impossible shot. Those moments reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. The story lived on, even if only in whispers. I began to realize that maybe being forgotten was its own kind of immortality. Heroes whose names are carved in stone eventually become history lessons, recited by students who feel no heartbeat in the words, but whispers linger. They travel like smoke, reshaped by each voice, impossible to pin down. And in that way, maybe Hawk would live longer than Evelyn Carter ever could. Still, the human part of me longed for recognition, a hand on my shoulder. Someone saying aloud, "You mattered. You did something no one else could." That hunger gnawed at me even as I told myself it didn't. Some nights I imagined sitting across from my future children, telling them the truth, letting them know their mother had once carried the weight of history in her hands. But each time I imagined it, I saw their eyes roll, or worse, narrow with disbelief. And so the words stayed locked inside. Over time, I learned to live with the duality. By day, I was Evelyn again, ordinary, blending in. By night, in my mind, I replayed the legend, not to brag, but to remind myself I wasn't invisible. Some nights I wrote it down in journals, long accounts of that mission, of the calculations, of the silence. Then just as quickly, I tore the pages out and burned them. Secrets aren't meant to be captured. They lose their power when caged. The hardest part was forgiveness, forgiving the men who dismissed me, forgiving the commanders who erased me, forgiving myself for carrying the bitterness so long. In time, I came to see it differently. My silence was not punishment. It was protection. Legends do not belong in glass cases. They belong in the marrow of those who lived them. Even now, years later, when I walk under a sky so wide it seems to swallow the world, I whisper the line that defined me. One bullet, two lives, one legend, and every time I feel both the weight and the lift of it, a burden and a gift forever entwined. So no, you will not find my name in the pages of history books. You will not see my face carved into bronze or my service etched into stone. But if you listen closely, if you walk among the quiet spaces where soldiers gather, you might hear the whisper, "Hawk," and that is enough, because legends do not live in medals or files. They live in the shadows, in the hearts of those who remember, in the silence that refuses to die. And though Evelyn Carter may have been erased, Hawk remains, not as a person, but as a reminder that sometimes the ones you doubt most carry within them the power to change everything. And maybe that is the truest recognition of all. Some people will never be celebrated. Their names will never be written on walls or stitched on ribbons. Yet they are the ones who change the course of battles and sometimes the course of history. I learned that the hard way. I was not meant to be remembered. My file was erased, my story sealed away. But erasure does not erase truth. What stays is not the medal you wear or the speech someone gives when the cameras are rolling. What stays is the life that was spared because of you. The brothers and sisters who walked home when they could have been carried. The quiet knowledge inside your chest that you made a difference, even if no one will ever say your name out loud. There is a kind of revenge in that, not against the enemy we faced, but against every doubt, every laugh, every whisper that said I would never be enough. The sweetest victory was not pulling the trigger. It was proving to myself and to the world in silence that I was never the mistake they thought I was. If you are listening now, hold on to this. Do not let the world's doubt decide who you are. Do not wait for recognition to tell you that you matter. Believe in your own fire, especially if others cannot see it. Sometimes the greatest power lies in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to show its light. If you believe that the quietest heroes deserve to be remembered, if you believe that courage takes many forms, then join me here, like this story. Subscribe to this channel. Military revenge, and stand with those who have been forgotten but never defeated. Because legends may live in silence, but they should never be alone.